Thanks. Thank you, everyone, and thanks for joining. I apologize for being 2 minutes late, but that's the nature, unfortunately, of me, and I apologize for it. I've got the distinct pleasure today in introducing my good friend, Sid Peimer. And first of all, Sid, Mazel Tov on your wedding. And I know you've just been married, and Mazel Tov to you and your beautiful wife. So well done. I just want to tell, before I even introduce Sid and go through his very lengthy CV, which I won't spend 10 hours on, which you could, I just want to tell the story of the Cape Chamber of Commerce and Industry. I've been involved, and my business has been involved with that Cape Chamber for about 35 years, but the Cape Chamber itself is over 200 years old. And the Cape Chamber was an illustrious chamber. It's probably I think it's the second oldest chamber in the world, probably the biggest chamber of commerce in Africa. I know it challenged Egypt. And this was an august body. And it started falling apart as business became more frenetic. And over the past 15 years, the chamber started collapsing, both financially and with the membership. And it wasn't anymore the voice of business that we knew the Chamber of Commerce to be. And at the time, when they were in a desperate situation, they appointed Sid Peimer. And that's why I'm telling you this whole story, because Sid came in and he did some things that irritated some people. He did some things that were different, that had not been thought of before. But the reality is he turned the tide completely. He revived that Cape Chamber of Commerce and Industry back to its illustrious history of 200 years. And I remain a member of that Chamber of Commerce. I find it extraordinarily relevant. But obviously the worry was that it would collapse. And Sid, I want to personally thank you for doing what you did. I know it's taken a couple of years, and I know that once you've completed your task and you've put it back on the rails, you've now moved on to better things. And I personally thank you on behalf of the Cape Chamber of Commerce and Industry for what you did. Now, quickly just have a look at the background. Sid is a qualified pharmacist. You don't remind me of a pharmacist. My dad was a pharmacist, and I was sent off to pharmacy school in Grahamstown. I lost 2 days. You actually qualified, so well done. You then became a copywriter, a planner. You have an MBA from UCT. That's actually not a notch in your belt, but anyway, Rhodes University was the answer. And you then got involved with strategy management with a whole lot of companies: Liberty Life, Chicken Licken, FedEx, Netcare. I'm not going to go through them all. Mr. Delivery, Nestle, SAB, Espor, etc. So well done on all of that. But the reality is that all that came into fruition when you saved the Chamber of Commerce. And again, I'm getting back to it. I know that you're going on to better things, and I know that you're going to share with us today some of your insights into the turnaround strategies that you have. What really intrigued me most of all was the yo-yo competition, because I fancied myself as a bit of a yo-yo champ, and I will challenge you when I see you next. So over to you, Sid. We're looking forward to this exciting discussion. Thank you.
Oh, gosh. Thank you, Michael. And no, I must thank you. Actually, on this chat, we've got 3 past presidents of the Chamber of Commerce, and a lot of success that the business had was that I could draw on the expertise. We've got Jeff Jacobs here, we've got Michael, we've got Jeremy Wiley. I just happened to be the person who executed it, but I will keep all the accolades. Thank you so much. And yes, I just want you to make sure you know who's addressing you. I am the Paul 1972 Coca-Cola Yo-Yo champion. Let's get straight onto it. I chatted to Lisa, but, Michael alluded to the fact that, let's talk about the things you did at the chamber to turn the company around during COVID it's 200 years old and things like that. And that's also a topic. But Lisa and I sat down and we thought, well, let's talk about the philosophy of entrepreneurship. Okay. So what is philosophy? Well, philosophy quite simply is the love of wisdom. It's easy to remember. Philo, I love philo pastry. So philo is love. And I can't think of anything Sophie. I don't know if you know why Sophie. So it's the love of wisdom. But there are 5 branches of philosophy. And the branch that I want to focus on today is what's called epistemology. And I love epistemology. And the reason is that epistemology says, well, that's fine, but how do you know? How do you know entrepreneurship is good? How do you know we should invest in entrepreneurship? How do you know that entrepreneurship is going to turn around the country? So it asks, how do you know? And with that, it probably satisfies my yearning for curiosity, which is one of my core values. But so today we're going to focus on entrepreneurship within, let's call it the paradigm of philosophical epistemology. And I thought that sounded really fancy and really academic, but I think it is appropriate for where we're going. Also, if you look at the word entrepreneurship, if you look at the root, it's French and English, it means undertaking and enterprise. So you actually have to do something. I don't think there's any doubt that Elon Musk, the label of entrepreneurship on Elon Musk would be contested in any way. What's an enterprise? He undertakes it, whether landing on Mars, building electric vehicles, or trying to buy Twitter. And that reminded me of a quote by Livingston, the poet. And he said, "We judge ourselves by what we're capable of, but others judge us by what we've done." And that, in essence, is required for entrepreneurship to have occurred. But let's just go back a few centuries, 1700s. And in those days, if you were the landowner or the lord of a manor, whatever it is, that was considered divine ordination. It wasn't that the wealthy or successful people had any special skills other than the fact that they were wealthy. So they were literally considered fortunate, whereas those who were born into poverty and stayed there were considered unfortunate. And that is how we thought about life in previous centuries. But today, that's changed. And we look at entrepreneur as a very, we equate that to success. And the rhetoric around entrepreneurship motivates us. I saw recently that sex industry workers in Canada want to be now considered as entrepreneurs. Why? Because it creates legitimacy for what you do. If I'm an entrepreneur, then I have the positive qualities of an entrepreneur, irrespective if you agree or disagree with what I'm doing. But the narrative has developed and has made the identity imbued with attributes of freedom, success, and most important of all, master of his or her own destiny. And what's more, they say that they give us the impression, society does, that anyone can attain it. You just have to implement that special method, buy this book, do this course, or the other myriad tonics of advice that they want us to swallow. And if you haven't managed to attain it, you just haven't tried hard enough, or embraced failure enough times, or connected with your inner guide, or whatever. The only reason we are told why we are not free and wealthy is because of us. It's of our reluctance to embrace the open secrets that fill the non-fiction shelves at the bookstore. So in essence, the responsibility of the plight of the citizen is the citizen themselves. The message we get is that anyone can make it. I was a car guard, now I'm a surgeon. Okay. We get the message that anyone can make it. And society also amplifies entrepreneurship. In 1984, in the United States, there were 4 universities that offered entrepreneurship as a stream. Then in 2003, there were 400. And I think today you'd probably struggle to find a university that does not offer entrepreneurship as a major. So I found this quote by Thomas Piketty in his book, Capital and Ideology. Actually, I didn't find the quote. The quote was shared to me by Professor Robert Eberhard. But that quote says, every human society must justify its inequalities. Unless reasons for them are found, the whole political and social edifice stands in danger of collapse. Every human society must justify in some way its inequalities, otherwise the system doesn't work. So I put it in the form of a question, and that was why in a country, South Africa, with so few haves and so many, relatively so many have-nots, why do things look so normal? And I know normal is a relative term, high walls and electric fences and miles of shacks in informal settlements should not be taken as normal, but that is what we have. And obviously in South Africa, there are other reasons that they posit for our inequality, or we see posited for our inequality, such as the fact, we were 40 million people in 1994. We're now over 60 million. Okay. How do you manage that? Well, they've shown us how not to manage it. But combine that with SOE mismanagement and state capture, and you get what we got. That's it. But if everyone is responsible for their own success, which we are told is attainable, then what do we do with these the figures that I've seen is that there's a 70% failure rate of startups in the first 5 years. Okay, now that's startups you can measure. That's not the startups that weren't registered or we never knew about or whatever. So of those startups that were registered, 70% from the data tells us that they won't be around within 5 years. And I think the number could even be higher than that. I attended a lecture last week by Professor Robert Eberhard from Stanford. And he put it into a very brief sentence. He says, entrepreneurship does pay, it's just rare. But we don't notice the rarity because we celebrate entrepreneurial success. Those that don't succeed get very little, if any, airtime. But this is important. I am not judging the practice of entrepreneurship as good or bad. I think it's great. I'm a serial entrepreneur myself. At the moment, I've got 2 ventures that I'm supporting. One is in multidimensional scaling, and the other is solving the hotel toaster problem. I'll chat about one of them later. Then on top of that, we now have the gig economy. Okay, you work at your own pace and your own time. It's great. They offer a lot of these freelance sites also offer the option of choosing your leave dates. I used it myself. I used to write on the side, and I had a Latin American agent that got me to write things once in a while. That was nice. I used to write on the side and got a bit much, after a day's work, the last thing you want is a brief. And I used to write about, I know nothing about accounting, but if you want to ask someone about Latin American accounting systems, I'm your guy. The client loved my work, and it showed you that they could match me with someone any in the world, and that was the gig economy. And you can choose your own leave dates. It was great. And I took a month off, but little did I realize, even in the gig economy, you close your doors for a month and you come back, a lot of your business is gone. But anyway, so be it. If we look at the gig economy through an economic lens, okay, it doesn't make that much sense. Some of you might know about Proposition 22. Now, Proposition 22 was legislation that was passed in California that allowed you, it was mainly for Uber and Lyft, to allow their drivers to not be employees, but to be contract workers. And people voted on Proposition 22. And the California Chamber of Commerce voted in favor. Kind of makes sense, lowest costs for Uber, and that's good business. But what was really interesting is that 50% of Uber drivers voted in favor of Proposition 22. They voted in favor of not getting pension, not getting medical aid, not getting paid leave, and not getting all those other supports that you get from employment. I went into formal employment about 7 years ago, and yes, what I really loved was, Saturday and Sunday you're buying, but you're getting paid. You're sick, you get. I even got paid in December and January, okay, which are usually dead months for an independent entrepreneur. So yeah, it was great, and those were wonderful benefits. But from an economic point of view, for Uber drivers to say, I don't want all these benefits. I want, what do we sell them? Freedom. I want to be my own boss. I want to be CEO of me. And those are the narratives that we've sold people. So they make choices that are not economically prudent. So if you've got a family, or you've got some responsibility, or you want some security in your life, why would you vote not to have that? Why? Because the narrative of entrepreneurship is so strong, and it appeals to the identity that we buy into today, that it overrides our economic sense in certain cases. So once again, I want to reiterate, I'm not saying entrepreneurship is bad. I'm just pointing out some of the nuances of entrepreneurship that we gloss over and that we miss, and are important for the country. For example, in 2021, the South African government allocated 700 million rand to informal entrepreneurs. There were 14,000 recipients. How many of those today do we know are boosting jobs? One, two. Well, make no mistake, pouring money into the informal sector is fair practice in an unfair society. Okay, that's fair practice. That makes sense. But there are other issues at stake here, and it's not only a South African thing. Also, about 15 years ago, I worked on economic development for the government as a consultant and as an entrepreneur. And the minister at that time gave 1,000 informal traders 1,000 rand to see if something would come of it. Well, the bottom line is nothing came of it. And what this says to me is that governments are terrible at getting citizens to undertake enterprises. That is not their role. I understand it buys votes, but it does not contribute to GDP. Okay, should they, so I will come to what their role should be. Okay, they have a very important role when it comes to business. If you go into I call it Schumpeter, some people call it Schumpeter economics, and then you've got a Keynesian, and now you've got Milton Friedman. But the role of government has a certain nuance, and it's muddied. But As I said, it's not a South African phenomenon. Some interesting research was done in 2010, where government action to promote business incubators was investigated in 3 North American states. Okay, and this is what they found. Business incubators were more likely to be formed for the following reasons. Okay, government would now invest in business incubators for these 4 reasons. Number 1, they were falling behind in economic development in the region. So let's finance some incubators. 2, there wasn't growth, so let's finance some incubators. There were slack resources. In other words, they had budget and they had to spend it. So, makes sense. And the 4th reason was that other states around them were doing it. So let's do it as well. Okay, 4 reasons. Falling behind, growth was not being met, they had the budget, and other people were doing it. Okay. In essence, they were acting with what we call bounded rationality. That's what happens when you go to a restaurant and you don't really know what's good. Okay, I get very confused in Chinese restaurants. I don't know what chow mein and this and that, but I'm forced to make a decision. I'm boundedly rational. I know so much about food, okay, but I can see the people at the table with me are hungry and want me to make a decision, okay? So you make a decision. You make a boundedly rational decision. You don't know how good the cook is at making that dish. You don't really know if you enjoy it. You don't really know if that's really, really what you feel like, but you make a decision. You make a boundedly rational decision. I think they also call it satisficing as well, where you make a decision that allows you to move forward and isn't necessarily the best decision. So what should governments do? Okay, I'm going to get to entrepreneurship itself, but I think the philosophy of entrepreneurship is informed by government action as well. So what should they do? Well, as Milton Friedman also alludes to, they should do their job. Okay, their job is not to do this and get that in. Their job is to create an environment favorable to economic growth, not to try and directly produce growth itself. It's not their area. Their job is to make it a suitable environment for private sector to do its thing. That's why I've mentioned state-owned enterprises. State-owned enterprises represents the government's initiatives to help private sector do its job. Now, if those are in disarray, well, it speaks for itself. But enough about the philosophy of entrepreneurship. In the advertisement for this talk, it was stated that I will share the 3 factors that are associated with what is called an entrepreneurial orientation. Okay. There's a fair amount of research on the topic, and most of the authors agree that these 3 traits are present, and it's in an umbrella concept called EO, Entrepreneurial Orientation. It's kind of researched over and over again. And the 3 attributes that they say are associated with a propensity for success in entrepreneurship is firstly, risk-taking, secondly, innovation, and thirdly, proactivity. And I'm going to expand on those 3 now as well. There are other factors, that have tested and found a correlation, such as passion and perseverance. I think that needs to be present. But I think that's kind of obvious. We could add a thick skin, because you hear the word no a lot when you come up with new ideas. My hotel toaster gave me a lot of no's. Also, correlation is not necessarily causation. Sibling rivalry could have been a factor that makes me want to outperform my siblings. So I've become more driven. There are a number of other, but I think if these things are missing, your propensity for risk, your propensity for innovation, and being proactive, if those are missing, then there probably is a problem. So it's necessary, but not sufficient, in my opinion. So let me just talk about risk-taking. I think risk-taking relates a lot to a concept that people find difficult to embrace, and that's uncertainty. Okay? It's not possible to know the future. And sometimes when people behave as if they know the future, that's not a great a recipe. Uncertainty, it's not possible to know the future. It is possible to have an idea about the future. Okay? And there's a difference. So we have to understand you can't live life backwards. I think the great Randy used to offer $1 million reward for anyone who could show extrasensory qualities, including prediction. And he never ever paid it. And I've looked now, there's still a lot of prizes online if you can demonstrate that. It comes to over $1 million. Anyway, why was I talking about that? Uncertainty, yeah, that the future is uncertain, and it's how you embrace that uncertainty and know that you can have an idea about the future. That doesn't mean you can know the future. Also, with risk-taking, a lot of people see it as an all or nothing activity or attribute. I have to take the risk or I don't take the risk. But if we look at the world of finance and we look at options, what is an option? An option gives you the right, but not the obligation to purchase something. Okay, gives you the right, but not the obligation for a small fee. I remember we used to take forward cover out against the exchange rate when we used to import containers. And for a small fee, I didn't have to worry about the rand dollar exchange. Except once I thought, I've taken forward covers so often. Why don't I just not take it this one time? I don't have to tell you what happened. Anyway, with risk-taking, the ability to understand that you have options, okay? And in the literature, it's called real options reasoning. In other words, I've seen something, there might be something in it. What can I do to retain the option? Okay. So I think this is going to be a trend. I'm not going to buy a factory or even the machines, but I want an option to investigate this sector or this trend. So maybe I can have a small batch made or whatever. So it's one thing we need to understand, that risk is not an all or nothing. We have at our disposal real options reasoning, which we can take advantage of. And then there's also something that looks at risk, especially at the risk from a macro perspective, where we're looking at a 70% failure rate within the first 5 years. And that is the phenomenon of entrepreneurship. Okay. Now, what entrepreneurship is, there are a number of ventures that have started as entrepreneurship ventures, where a corporation allows its staff member to put forward a proposal for an activity that may or may not lie within the parameters of the existing business. Then they will sponsor that to a certain degree. They'll take either 49% or whatever the case might be, and they will then invest in this entrepreneurship venture. And entrepreneurship actually, a friend of mine, Kolani, just graduated with a PhD in entrepreneurship. Why I think that holds greater promise for our recovery than entrepreneurship is that your risks are substantially lower in an entrepreneurship venture. Why? Well, you've got all the resources at your disposal. You probably have shared services. The financial director of the corporation has obviously an interest in you. The HR, you've got all that experience, and you've got all that support, and you've probably got deeper pockets because of that to allow you to survive the ups and downs at the start. So entrepreneurship, I feel, and so it sounds a bit disappointing, a lot of corporates don't really understand entrepreneurship. They think it's a form of entrepreneurial activity in the organization. And it's quite scary, the amount of corporates that don't know what entrepreneurship is. Okay. They see it as entrepreneurial activity of their existing staff. So let's get in a motivational speaker on sales, make these guys more entrepreneurial. And that is not what entrepreneurship is. And I think once the corporates understand the benefits of entrepreneurship and government understands the more assured return that entrepreneurship provides, hopefully we'll see some growth there. Then when it comes to innovation, yes, and proactivity. When it comes to proactivity, there is something that a lot of us overlook. And I listened to a podcast or an interview this morning by Wayne Naidu, who was the founder of Duke Advertising. And I did some freelance work for Wayne many years ago. He's a lovely chap. And I wanted to work for him, but he set the bar a bit higher. So this morning he spoke about how he started the business, and it was very similar to what I encountered. He thought, he serviced clients in his previous agency for 10, 15 years, did a great job, 7 days a week, 24 hours a day, so surely those clients would support him when he started his own shop. Didn't happen. Okay. And the advice that I hear over and over by entrepreneurs who do have a solid business are these 4 words: pick up the phone. Okay. That's it. Your previous clients that you sacrificed so much for, that you worked so hard for, that you are such a genius. Yeah, well, you've moved on. Okay. There is no guarantee that that relationship will benefit you when you set up an independent organization or firm. So let me give you an example of one of my entrepreneurial pursuits, and I'll take you through some of the traits that I had to build on to be able to get it somewhere. And it is nowhere near completion. I use entrepreneurship more as a side hustle. I find it stimulating. I'm a creative person, so it gives me an outlet for my creativity. But to me, entrepreneurship, where it fits into my portfolio, is as a side hustle. If it makes money, that's great. So when I worked for South African druggists, I was in my late 20s. I was the national services manager for 450 pharmacies, I think we had in those days. And I used to fly all over the place, and I used to live in hotels. And I used to go down for breakfast to the hotel. And I like toast in the morning. So you go to the toaster, and they've got those conveyor toasters. So now you've got 1 or 2 choices. Okay, you can stand around like an idiot, okay, or you can go and get your eggs and hope no one steals your toast. Those are your 2 choices. And these things are dirty, they're ugly, they're slow. Anyway, so that was in 1987. Anyway, so a few years ago, I had the pleasure of flying to Joburg, stayed in a hotel. I don't know what they cost 2,500 rand, 3,000 rand for a night, and I go down for breakfast. And what do I have to do? I'm forced to make two choices. It's the same conveyor toasters that have been around since 1987, okay, giving me this problem. And I thought, no, I've paid 3,000 rand for a room, and now I've got to stand here waiting for toast. It doesn't work for me. Anyway, cut a long story short, I thought, well, why don't I try and solve the problem? And I came up with a hotel toaster, a vertical toaster. And the biggest risk I took was that people would laugh at me. Everybody did laugh at me, except two people. And those two people were hotel owners. They said to me, Sid, you're right. It's a problem. I'll take one. Okay. And my wife didn't laugh at me. I came up with an initial idea. I'll just share screen quickly, just to show you what it is. And this is just one of the entrepreneurial ventures. As I said, I've got others. Okay, so on the left is the original version. I thought it was so cute, looked like a product from Apple. And the designer himself named it the Kai Toaster and did an upgraded version. And strangely enough, I looked for a manufacturer in Cape Town just to do me a pilot batch. Nothing. I then have guys from China hounding me to make the toast, except it's a little expensive. But now we're looking for a 50,000 euro investment so that we can make the pilot batch offshore. They say that Cape Town is like the Silicon Valley of Africa. It's not what I found. My multidimensional scaling application for the advertising industry, I looked for developers in Cape Town, South Africa. They don't answer your email. And maybe it was just me. I'm now coming from a sample of one. So we can't say that that's a reality, but that is what happened to me. So when an undertaking, I'm nearly out of time. When an undertaking turns out well, we call it a calculated risk. When it turns out badly, we call it a gamble. But at the end of the day, audentis fortuna juvat. Fortune favors the bold. And in the words of Theodore Roosevelt that I'll close off with, he says, it is hard to fail, but it is worse never to have tried to succeed. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Sid. Beautiful, insightful words and definitely food for thought. I'm going to hand over to Jason, who will thank you, and then we'd like to open up the floor for questions.
Sid, a huge thank you for that. I feel that you really gave us a good background, not necessarily only about yourself, but about entrepreneurship in general. And I loved I loved your way of the love of wisdom and the epistemology aspect of entrepreneurship. And I think that three key take-home things that you mentioned for me are the risk-taking, the innovation, and the proactivity. And for me, the one that stands out the most is the risk-taking. I know people who've got some great ideas and have gone no further than an idea. And a friend of mine always says, the wealthiest businessmen are the ones who are all lying in cemeteries where they took their ideas and dreams with them because they were too scared to try or to share. So thank you very much for sharing part of your journey with us. The part that I just want to mention something else where you seemed so excited one day. You and I met at a meeting, and I said to you, "So, how was your day?" And you went, "I launched an airline today." And yeah, I don't know how the airline is doing nowadays. That was a few years ago, but that's one of the things about you that just stand up, that childlike wonder and excitement from an adult perspective. So thank you for everything that you have shared with us. Really appreciate it. You've given me take-home value, and I'm going to assume that you've given take-home value to the other people who are on this Zoom meeting.
Right.
So thank you very much for that. Is there anybody in our group who has any questions for Sid or any comments they'd like to make? Unmute yourself, hopefully put your camera on, or you can type it into the chat box and then I'll just read it out.
Yeah,
I'd like to ask the question, Sid. My question is more around, I deal with a lot of entrepreneurs at ORT, and something that comes up quite a bit is fear, which maybe you kind of addressed with the risk-taking and the uncertainty. But fear is a reality. Can you maybe just unpack that a little bit and just help explore it to let us understand?
Yeah. Look, a lot of things we do in life that work out for us are done against our impulses. So fear, worked for us. It's why we're at the top of the food chain. You don't run into a pride of lions. And in the same way, like I'm a bit scared at the moment. I'm launching a one-day course in advanced strategic planning. And it's scary. But so what I did was I set the date and then I worked back, and it just took a bit of the fear out of it. But trying to say, and then, do what you need to do. Take a tranquilizer, that's also fine. So, use whatever's available. So I used methodology. So I'm no different. I get as scared as anyone else. I mean, it's human nature to be scared to do these things, because you weren't programmed like this to survive. You're programmed to stay with the tried and tested. Okay, that's what it means to be human. So yeah, the first thing you have to realize is that fear is part of it, and it's not about overcoming the fear. I don't think I overcame the fear. I had a glass of wine last night, which helped. My wife calmed me down a little. I then changed the system slightly. I then condensed the course from 2 days to 1 day, which reduced the risk. Okay, those are things in your control. So all you can do is look at the stuff that's in your control, okay, and then just try and manipulate that to fool yourself into reducing the fear. Roy's got a question, I think, Lisa.
Yeah, Roy?
Yeah. Thanks, Sid, and thanks for your insight. And Jason also commented on something. So I'm working every day with entrepreneurs, and one of my biggest disappointments is that government canned the 12J, and the funding generally for startup and particularly early stage businesses has come to a grinding halt since the stop. I've noticed it not just in Cape Town where I'm based, but in Joburg. But I wanted to just add to the many positive things you said, and that is, I think the real driver of entrepreneurship is to embrace problems. And if we think about it in our lives, so the problem actually creates the opportunity. And that's really what an entrepreneur is around. He's identified, as you have with your toaster, he's identified a problem, and therefore immediately is an opportunity. And I believe, and I've always run my life, and these some people who know me, my whole life I've driven. It sounds strange, but I've nearly always looked, are there problems and where are the problems? And that's in one's family life or one's friendships. The problem allows you to improve it, to do it better. And so in business with entrepreneurs, I think the driver is the person who sees a problem and then takes that and converts it into the opportunity. The person who's scared, as Jason alluded to and you did, I come across every day. In the last 3 years, met with 250 entrepreneurs, and they've got this great idea. They're passionate about it. They've even got the 3 Fs: friends, family, and fools who want to invest with them, and they've got all of that. And then it's the fear factor. And as Jason said, I always say to people, and it happens every day, well, if you're not going ahead with what you believe you can do, you've failed already. And sadly enough, I actually had an incident over the weekend where I was with 2 very smart Stellenbosch girls, highly qualified, both had just completed postgraduate degrees. And I was talking about them, and one's always got to be a bit careful. I said, no, you girls are, you've got boyfriends, you're married. No, they said, we're not in relationships. We don't want to get involved in that. We're focusing on our careers because, you get into a relationship and then it doesn't work out and you go through all that heartache. And I said, for God's sake, how do you go through life saying, I'm not prepared to drive or attempt something in case it fails? And that's at the heart of why people don't, that potentially have businesses, entrepreneurs, don't go ahead. It's the fear of failure. But the effect is they failed anyway if you haven't made the attempt. Anyway, thanks for your insights. And it's wonderful to hear, as Lisa knows, I'm a big supporter of entrepreneurs and early stage businesses. It's wonderful to hear your insights. Thank you.
Roy, thank you so much. And I think an aspect that also comes up is this continual chase for VC funding. And, people come to me and say, I want to start this business. So I said, well, what do you need now? I need an office. I need this. I need that. I need that. So I said, no, you need one thing, a customer with money. Okay. And then, you can, whatever. So there's also this mindset that I need the finance before I can move forward. And that's not always the case. But I must say there is this constant advertising of, I just secured $3.4 million for my my broom with the extra length handle. So that's in our face all the time. So I don't blame these young people for wanting to look for VC because they think that's the norm.
Cool. Yogesh, Sid, Yogesh put his hand up with a question.
Hi,
Yogesh, do you want to unmute? If you can, put your camera on. If not, it's not the end of the world.
Oh, let's try that. Okay, I had a bit of an emergency, so let's excuse my hair. Sid, always great to hear you speak. What I actually had a question. We had a discussion about this probably a week or so ago, and it's linked to kind of forced entrepreneurship versus entrepreneurship out of some kind of choice or passion or inspiration. So during COVID, I had a couple of colleagues who are very highly qualified, and I've worked with them for a very long time, kind of at the top of their fields, and they got retrenched. And they're still battling to find a job. So now they've started their own businesses, and I help them where I can, and our network of friends, we help them where we can. So they were kind of forced into it out of necessity. Whereas I have some other friends, also same circumstances during COVID, except they didn't get retrenched, but they thought that, well, let's look at how the world is working right now. We see several problems. We think we can provide solutions. So let's dive in. Let's take the risk and dive in and see what happens. So one was inspired, an inspired move, and the other was just out of pure necessity and desperation. So how do you think that would affect their mindset when going into entrepreneurship, or would it affect? Does it matter where you start, or does it matter how you, or what does it matter what your driving factor is? I think that's essentially it. Does that matter to you?
Yeah, look, I'm sure it influences it, but I think the overriding driver is your inherent perspective. And Jason mentioned that magic word earlier. It's perspective. Companies want my input. They don't necessarily want data. They don't necessarily want knowledge. They want perspective. The person who has to go into it and the person who wants to go into it, I'm sure it affects it, but I think the default perspective that they form, in other words, their more established traits, are probably a lot more of an influence than what happened to them outside to get into entrepreneurship. But I think it's different for everybody. But it's a very good question. How much influence do external events influence you. You know, a lot of us, you know, we can be in a certain situation and something outside us happens and we just collapse. We can be in another situation, the same person, and something really happens that's bad and we thrive. So yeah, there's also that individual component too.
Cool. Sid, Jeremy has a question for you. Jeremy, if you can unmute yourself, please.
Good morning, everyone. Morning, Sid. Thanks very much for your insights, which also have given me a couple of useful pointers. And I think the one is that it's much easier to spell solution finder than entrepreneur.
And I think that's difficult. You know how long it took me to say epistemological.
Yeah, but one question I have got for you is, in all your research and experience over many years of entrepreneurial endeavors, have you come across an entrepreneur that has never failed before?
Oh, look, if you look at the law of averages and basic statistics, there will be a number of people that have progressed. Do I know anyone that has never failed? Well, you know, failure is also a term that can be interpreted in different ways. You know, if we look at Lawrence Levine, he started Mr. Delivery. He used to work at Woolworths and he thought he'd failed. I've worked at Woolworths, I'm packing these shelves. No, I have failed. So I think failure is in everybody's lives. And he never failed with his first his first solutions journey. He never failed at that, although all the cards were stacked against him. You know, I mean, people laughed at him, home deliveries, you know, but he knew South Africans, we're damn lazy. So there's a good chance that it'll work, you know, and a lot of ventures start off based on assumptions that are wrong. Uber was a bad move. Uber went against everything your parents taught you. Do not get into a stranger's car. Okay. But so anyway, so we asked Uber, you know, how come you guys took off? And there were a lot of e-hailing ventures that were started before and after Uber. And Uber said, you know what? It was timing. When we launched, smartphones were coming into their own. So that's why we've got the lion's share of the market. You know, a lot of, you know, Google was a bad idea. I mean, firstly, they spelt it wrong. They meant Google. But I didn't need, I had, what did I have? Yahoo. I had Yahoo. I don't need another search engine in my life. What for? Okay. What is this reverse links nonsense they're talking about? Anyway, we all got addicted to reverse links and SEO. And that, you know, careful not to mix SEO with SOEs. The one works. I have met entrepreneurs whose entrepreneurial venture did not fail, but I don't think anyone's escaped a failure as such.
Cool. Thanks for that, Sid, and thanks for that very interesting question there, Jeremy. There's a question in the chat box from Howard that I'd like to ask you, please, Sid. And he says, is there any confusion between entrepreneurship and business ownership? And does this lead to shaming of and disappointment for the 99% of business owners who are not changing the world?
Okay.
If you didn't get it all, it's in the chat.
Okay, and the second last word in the chat, if I just change that second last word, it puts a whole new complexion on the question. So is shaming and disappointment of the 99% business owners who are not changing their world. Okay, people get into entrepreneurship with a solution that may change the world, but they get into entrepreneurship to change their world. Okay, there are some people that cannot tolerate the status quo. Why aren't we living on Mars? It's unacceptable. Okay, and whether we get to Mars or don't get to Mars, I don't know. That's not the point. But the point is it's changing their world, the entrepreneur's world. So yeah, I think a lot of entrepreneurs bring out things that might seem mundane, that we never heard of, that just might be one point in the supply chain. I'm sure there's somebody now who imports sodium diacetate by the container. A lot of people don't know that salt and vinegar chips. South Africa is one of the biggest consumers of salt and vinegar. And it's not salt and vinegar, it's sodium diacetate. And Chinese cut the price out of that. But anyway, so yeah, maybe it's just somebody doing. And remember, the definition of entrepreneurship is undertaking an enterprise. So we do entrepreneurial activity all day. We undertake an enterprise. Sometimes the enterprise is different. Sometimes you use your left hand to brush your teeth, okay, instead of your right hand. So, but a lot of the things that the enterprises we undertake are not unusual, will not change the world, and don't have to change the world. Entrepreneurship is very much a self-indulgent activity as well. It's about you.
Thanks for that, Sid. Much appreciated. Lisa?
Thank you, Jason. I appreciate your help in handling the questions and being involved. Sid, thank you. An incredible hour, very insightful. Lots of, as I said earlier, food for thought, and yeah, an incredible way to start June. And yeah, just think of the way that you think and the philosophies that you've shared and your insights around the entrepreneurial orientation. Most grateful, and let's stay in touch. And thank you to our audience for being here and engaging, and I hope you benefited from this conversation. Keep safe and see you all soon. Bye.
Thanks so much.
Cheers, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you.